Heyo, Flame here, and welcome to the FlameHisWorld commentary of Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy. That being the final game in the Mega Man Game Boy sub-series, or the Rockman World sub-series as it's known in Japan, which I stand by the belief that that's a much better name for the series. But yes, going straight into this, Mega Man 5 is the most unique of the Mega Man Game Boy games. It's also the most popular among a lot of people from what I've read online. It seems to be the one that a lot of people go to even if they're not really that interested in Game Boy platformers as it is, like if they're Mega Man fans and whatnot, because it's so radically different to both the NES games and the other Game Boy games. Like, if you've played the NES games and then you come to this, you are still getting something new in terms of both the story, which we're seeing here, of just rock and roll encountering this guy with really wild hair called Terra. So you encounter him and you got the story, but you've also got the gameplay is quite radically different. Because not only are there a whole series of new enemies who technically aren't Robot Masters, more about that when we start fighting them, but also we'll be getting a new weapon, given as we saw just then with Mega Man getting wrecked. Mega Man's usual Mega Buster doesn't seem to actually affect Terra, who is the new enemy in this game. So it seems like Dr. Light might have to do a little bit of reverse engineering and maybe come up with something original, something that actually does change the way the gameplay plays out. Only subtly, I will say. Like, it's not like they've just completely taken away the gunplay and like gave them a shovel or some shit like that. Like, I've been playing Shovel Knight recently and starting to get into that. Good game, by the way. Like, I'm only a few bosses in, but like, yeah, I did sort of get my ass kicked in the Explodatorium. But yeah, so you will still have your jump and shoot man gameplay, but here we get the Mega Arm. The most powerful weapon ever devised. Like, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if that's accurate, given it ultimately is just a hand that shoots forward and then comes back. I'm pretty sure that, like, if you got a fucking tank or some shit, then you could probably beat the Mega Arm. Just throwing that one out there, like. But, you know, as far as weapons for Mega Man go, this is quite useful, because it functions sort of like the traditional Mega Buster charge shot that you get from like Mega Man 3 onwards in the main series, except it also comes back to Mega Man, and that can give you a second hit. So you're not just like shoot, recharge, you can kind of pick up the pace a little bit, which is not much, and it doesn't really make hard enemies easy or anything like that. It doesn't really change the gameplay too drastically, but it's enough that it kind of feels a little bit different. Like, it subtly adjusts the pacing of the gameplay, and it's kind of an awkward thing to explain, but like, if you watch the way the gameplay's gonna play out, you'll probably come to see what I mean about that. But here, for the next cutscene, we've had the name drop of Stardroids. Now, the Stardroids are a group of robots from outer space, and they're the standing Robot Masters for this game. So it looks like they're not the regular Robot Masters that Dr. Wily's put together, or Dr. Wily's appropriated from someone else like Dr. Light. No, it seems like these are basically alien robots. And that's the first time I've thought of it like that, but that makes them sound so much cooler. But also this here, this little cat robot assistant, Tango is a thing. I completely forget that I have him when I play this game. What he essentially does is, to my recollection, he just sort of goes and attacks all the enemies on screen when you send him out and just keeps on going until his power runs out. But I don't know if I've ever actually used it myself or not. This is the time I played this game, and there were a few outtakes where I fucked up and that. But I don't remember using Tango at all. Yes, here are our first 4 Stardroids. It does have a similar kind of setup to the other Mega Man Game Boy games where there's a series of 4 bosses, then once you beat those there's another series of 4 bosses. But instead of being named like Shoot Man or Cut Man or Guts Man or like having that same naming scheme, these are actually named after the planets of the solar system. And also Pluto. Because at the time this game came out, obviously this was before 2006 when Pluto was declassified as a planet, so yep, Pluto is here just along with all the others. But we won't actually be seeing Pluto until the next part, so we'll worry more about him then. But yes, Mercury, our first boss. His namesake, and I'm totally not just reading off my notes from Wikipedia here, but Mercury as a planet, it's the smallest planet actually, out of all the recognised planets in the Milky Way solar system at the time of recording clearly. But that is, like, it is the smallest planet and it's also the closest to the Sun. And if you know anything about the way that planets are named, at least the ones that were discovered years ago, not so much with more recent ones, but they tend to be named after the Roman deities. And Mercury was the messenger of the gods. I'm not sure exactly that much, like, I don't actually know that much when it comes to like ancient Roman mythology. Like, I recognise some stuff from ancient Egypt and a little bit from ancient Greece, and some of them are kind of cool. Like, I did actually study ancient Rome way back in primary school, like before I did like all the ancient Egyptian stuff that I talked about when we were facing off against Pharaoh Man in the last game. But yeah, I don't retain as much of that to memory. Like, I know a lot of the names because of the planets being named after them, but as for the gods themselves, there's not that much that sticks with me. So when I'm reading off these notes, they are very clearly things that I have done a little bit of homework earlier today on and just decided, yeah, this will be an interesting little factoid. But if I know I'm giving the game away here, but if I didn't, you'd all know anyway. And that's actually a surprisingly difficult little slide section to make. Like, you sort of have to stop yourself because the slide goes on a little bit longer and you will end up twatting yourself on the spike and dying if you're not careful. But yeah, as you're seeing there, I'm charging it up like the Mega Arm, like I will charge up the Mega Buster in the other games, but then he shoots out his fists along with it and pulls back. But yes, here is Mercury himself, the first boss of the game. And this is basically what he does. He turns into a blob, sort of like the Devils, like a little bit like what Yellow Devil does, except not really. And then he just sort of throws himself in pieces across the screen, and his pattern is basically this. As long as you hit him each time, I don't think he actually starts using any of his other attacks, so as long as you get that shot in, as soon as he pops his head up after the transformation sequence, you should be fine here. I went to him first because he is a fairly easy boss. On like the second or third time, I say, on the first time it might take a bit to get the pattern down of jumping over the little blobs, but once you realise how they move across, then you're fine. But yep, as with the other games, all the other Mega Man games, you still do acquire powers from beating the bosses. So we've got Mercury's weapon here. I will say the weakness chart is a little bit skewed in this, because like there are a lot of times when it's useful just to use the Mega Arm rather than using the specific weakness. But there's also some of the ones from the first batch of bosses that their weakness is actually a robot from the second batch of bosses, so you can't actually defeat them with their weakness until you go back in the boss rush. Which is an interesting way of doing things. I suppose it is the idea of showing that you've powered up over the course of this journey, and what used to be a boss that you'd have to take down with your standard weapon, you now have the specific tools for taking it down. And that's kind of an interesting difference compared to the other ones. Like, I know some of the other games had like a slightly different type chart to just go this guy, then this guy, then this guy. Like Mega Man 3 NES, you could sort of get a bit creative. But I seem to recall out of the games I've played, this is one of the, possibly the only one where it explicitly locks you out of having the weakness at the first time you fight him. I might be wrong about that, I might be misremembering, but it's such an unusual concept for Mega Man either way, because normally the strategy of the game is just knowing which boss order to fight them in, so you can have the ideal weaknesses and whatnot. But yes, this is Neptune. Not to be confused with the cute waifu from Hyperdimension Neptunia, which I will say, although I know the Compile Heart RPGs do tend to have a bit of a love 'em or hate 'em appeal, I'm on the love 'em side. Like, they are very basic RPGs, and they also love reusing their assets and making it known that they have a budget of, like, maybe less than the change in my wallet. Like, it very clearly shows that they're working with not many resources, but I do find a certain charm in those games. Like, out of the Neptunia series itself, I've played Rebirth 1 and Rebirth 2. Rebirth 1 is a really fun game. Rebirth 2 has some issues, but that's not really what we're here for. Although I will say, out of the Compile Heart games, I've also played Fairy Fence Ref Advent Dark Force. There is a playthrough of that over on FC Playthroughs that I spent a good 6 months on, I want to say, because I went to get all the different endings you can get. I did the different routes. So that's the standard goddess route, the vile god route, and also the evil goddess, like the extra bonus routes that they added in the Advent Dark Force version. But yes, Neptune in itself, I don't really remember much from him other than that he's got the, like, typical water creature design to him. His namesake planet is the furthest planet from the sun, so we've gone from Mercury, that's right up close, to the furthest one away. I believe before Pluto was declassified, it was Pluto that was furthest away. I may be wrong on that, I may be misremembering things. But yeah, the other namesake in terms of the Roman god is the god of the sea. So it makes sense why they've used that name for the water boss here, although there is going to be another water boss later, so get a feel for that now. I swear that's a different kind of blob to what Mercury was throwing around. I know the graphic looks very similar, but again, this is a very simple boss and you can beat him easily with the Mega Arm, possibly more so than Mercury even, because his patterns seem quite predictable there as well. Let's get our fancy weapon from Neptune and see what it is, because it has actually been a little while since I recorded this footage, and so although I remember like the levels and the bosses and whatnot, individual weapons, I kind of can't remember which is which. But yeah, it looks like for Mega Man this functions basically the same way that it functions for Neptune, so fair play, I guess, it does what it needs to do. And Saltwater seems like such an unthreatening name for a weapon. Like, it just does. Like, what are you gonna do? Throw saltwater at him? Maybe cure some of the wounds in his mouth or something? I don't fucking know. So, Mars. Mars is actually one of the harder bosses to my recollection. You'll see what I mean when we get to him, but I seem to recall him having a bit more going backwards and forwards. And also his stage. You want to keep an eye out for the mines on the ground, because they do get a little bit lost in the like grayscale art style here. You know, it's a Game Boy game, they're doing the best they can. But you do start to see the little mines that can trap you if you're not quite noticing that you're stepping on a dangerous bit of ground that's going to blow up. Although saying that about the Game Boy, this game I have actually seen footage of it running in colour. I believe it's one of the Game Boy games that if you play it on a Game Boy Color, you can actually see slight colour variance. It's not overly detailed, so you're not going to be getting like NES quality visuals of it. But if you're the kind of person who likes to have the more colour tints, personally I prefer the grayscale to look at. But that is an option there. There were a handful of Game Boy games that were sort of Game Boy Color enhanced, from what I remember, because there were some of the Pokemon games, like, I can't remember if Red and Blue were like that. But Yellow I seem to recall being in colour. Like, when I recorded you that for the playthrough, I remember seeing all the different colours that, like, the towns adapt their colours to their namesakes. So, like, pewter would have pewter hues and so on and so forth. And I'm pretty sure Gold and Silver were technically Game Boy games. Like Crystal, that was a Game Boy Color exclusive. I think that sort of pushed the limits a bit far for what the Game Boy itself could do, so they needed the Game Boy Color for the enhanced version. I may be wrong in that, it might just be a marketing thing to make you buy a Game Boy Color, I don't know. Like, I'm not really that in the know about the technology of the Game Boy itself. I just know that I like all these endearing little platformers and RPGs, and I just really like the Game Boy, you know. I didn't actually have an original generation Game Boy, which might seem strange given how often I like to play Game Boy games on this channel and that. The earliest Game Boy I got, the first one I got, was my Game Boy Advance. And that was one of the original generation Game Boy Advances, not the SPs. It was one that had the same sort of shape to it as the N-Gage, which, you know, the N-Gage didn't do too well. No fucker used them for too long. But yeah, I do actually also have a Game Boy Color that I acquired a little bit later. I think I got it for like a couple of quid off like a market stall or a car boot or something like that. I remember I never had one when they first came out. I think I was a bit young then. Maybe. The first console I actually got was a Dreamcast. That was like the first console I had of my own. Like, I'd been playing on my brother's Mega Drive. Like, my older brothers would bring their Mega Drive over, but I didn't have my own console until I got the Dreamcast. And so, when I play these Game Boy games and that, most of the time these are games that I've picked up recently because I've come to appreciate this particular style of very simple looking gameplay. That's one thing I can say for myself, even though I have realised that I might not be the most engaging person in the world, maybe playing that down a little bit. That's a polite way of saying I know I'm boring. But like, I do have non-nostalgia blinded opinions on these games. I'm not just on the I played this as a kid so it's great and it's perfect and there's nothing wrong with it. By Mars, by the way. That, I had got away with that because I had the weakness now. I'm remembering what I was thinking of when I said he was hard. Because I remember watching someone fight him with just the Mega Arm, and it's a lot harder to fight him with just the Mega Arm. But yeah, I don't think I actually did Mars's little background information on his namesake. So Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. Everyone knows what Mars looks like. It's the red planet. It's the bright red one with all the volcanoes and whatnot. But the Roman god namesake is actually the Roman god of war. So, the aggressive fucker. Not to be confused with the Greek god of war, or any of the God of War games, which are pretty cool from what I've played. Like, I played the reboot. Oh, it's not really a reboot, it's actually a sequel, but the new one that came out earlier this year. That's a really fun game, although I can kind of see why a lot of old school God of War fans didn't get it. Because it's not God of War, it's not old school God of War, it's a very different kind of game. So if you were expecting a new God of War, then you're not going to really appreciate it for what it is, which is fair enough. I know that kind of came off a bit of like a snobby, people don't get it. But like, I know, it's not what people wanted, and that is absolutely fair enough. I've also recently been playing for the first time the original one, because I actually picked up the collection on PS3 years ago and never got around to playing it. But after playing the reboot, I figured I'd go back and play the original game, and it's kind of fun. Like, I'm not good at it, I'll be first to admit that, but it's fun. You know, like, there's a certain satisfaction in the gameplay, in the combat, and like waving your blades around, and especially when you upgrade the weapons and you can kind of plow through things a lot easier. And yeah, I do really enjoy what I've played that so far. I'm probably about on like the last third now where I'm in the games, because I just did the challenge of Poseidon, which was the weakest point in the game up to where I am. And I'll say that just because it kind of felt like it went on a bit, and there's a few enemies that take far too long to die. Looking at the fucking Cerberus dogs. Like, they're okay once you find out what you're doing with them, but there's a lot of trial and error where you're gonna inevitably fuck up until you get a pattern down, and you start using the Medusa head skill, and you flash them with that so that you can kill them in a few hits. But yeah, I'm enjoying the game for what it is. I'm getting really distracted from this game again, as I seem to have developed a habit of doing recently, but this is Venus's stage. Venus in this game is a dude. I know that's not how Venus works. Like, Venus's namesake is the Roman goddess of love. And she's kind of always been portrayed as the binary opposition to Mars. So Mars is the male god of war, and Venus is the female goddess of love. And I think she's known as the goddess of love and goddess of beauty, depending on interpretation. But that's kind of her thing. And so being like represented here as a male robot, maybe not, you know, the most obvious way of approaching things, but then I suppose they're going more for the planetary side of things than the mythological side of things, so fair play, I guess. But some interesting things I found about the planet Venus is, like, it's the second planet from the Sun, you know, just behind Mercury. But it also has the longest rotation period. Like, it takes it the longest to do a full, like, rotation around. I believe that's in reference to just the day-night cycle because of how it spins. But it also rotates the opposite direction to a lot of the other planets. So what that means is, on the planet Venus, the sun actually rises from the west and sets in the east. So it's kind of going the other way around to how it does on Earth and how it does on most of the other planets within our solar system. So I guess Venus is just being a bit different, doing things its own way and whatnot. But yep, now we're getting to Venus's boss fight, and Venus is weak to Mars's weapon. So let's see how long it takes to take down Venus here. Okay, I was trying to be sassy, but it does take a little bit longer, but it's still pretty easy, because what you're doing here is you can line up the missile weapons that Mars has. What I wasn't doing there that I probably should have done is you can actually have a couple of the missiles come out at once, so like you're more likely to get like a second swipe on him. But hey, I got him down easy enough, whatever. Like, none of these first four bosses, when you have the appropriate approach to them, none of them are that hard really. Like, it's only if you're trying to take on Mars without his weakness, like without Neptune's weapon, that it can be a bit of a bugger. But yeah, Venus, his weapon sort of homes along the top, from what I recall, and it can be useful against some bosses, from what I recall. But, you know, it's a little bit situational, I guess. But yeah, we also got the Rush Coil back, which always useful to have Rush. I'm gonna get more use from Rush than I am from fucking Tango. Like, I know they're going for the musical reference with Tango, as they do with all the other characters. But I can't not think of the fucking drink. And yes, this game does have an upgrade system, similar to how Mega Man 4 Game Boy did. Both of these Game Boy games actually predate Mega Man 7. So the Game Boy series actually had the idea of an item shop and the collectible chips as currency and whatnot before the main series did. So I guess that's kind of an interesting thing that these games did bring to the series. I suppose for this kind of game, given the whole game in itself, it's on a much smaller scale. It was probably like something extra added in to maybe encourage replayability if you were having trouble with a certain level or a certain boss or whatnot. So, you know, you could power up your weapons using things that you've collected from replaying other levels. Maybe it wasn't a thing necessary in the main games, but I still appreciate that it's there either way. Oh look, it's Terra back! And yeah, Terra is actually known as Earth in Japan, like in the Japanese version of the game. Which I suppose that makes sense, all the others are named after the other planets in the solar system. And like the main guy, the plot relevant guy, is Earth itself. Dark Moon Attack. What's going on with Mega Man's arms there? Jesus! But yes, Dark Moon, this little boss here, is a devil. It's a lot easier than, say, Yellow Devil from Mega Man 1. It's a little bit easier than the devil from Mega Man 3 as well. But yeah, just get a couple of shots in and he's basically no biggie. These things there, I'm kind of doing this the awkward way because you can actually just stand over on the left here and they'll miss you every time. I was still a little bit on the uncomfortable side. I wanted just to be safe and I ended up putting myself more in harm's way than I would have been in had I just stayed put over on the left. And staying put over on the left or over on the side where he's not would probably have made it a lot easier to jump over the ones that are coming towards me as well. But you know, when I'm in the moment recording, I'm not necessarily thinking straight, so I guess take it for what it is. Like, my gameplay skill, can be quite lacking sometimes. And yeah, I thought for the fuck of it, I'll just use the Mars weapon at the end here. I don't know if it's explicitly a weakness. Like, you don't need to worry about weaknesses here because the fully charged Mega Arm does as much damage as you're going to need to keep the boss fight moving along at a brisk pace. And that's him dead. God, that slowdown is the different pieces of him, the different parts fall down. It's a little bit sad just seeing him slowly crumble away. But, you know, maybe he shouldn't have tried to launch his whole body out of sin pieces. I might have had a bit more sympathy if he didn't do that. So this is the plot of what's going on for the second half. Essentially, the Stardroids are poaching energy from Earth to power up their own robots, and so that means that the next batch of robots that will fight are probably going to be a bit of a cut above these lot. At least in universe, that's what's going on. Like, they're probably not going to take too much work to take them out, just as a little bit of a precursor there. Yes, Light, we know there's an item shop. You've already plugged it to us. I won't need luck. Fuck you, I'm Mega Man, I can do it. We do get some really cool transitional scenes in some of these games, like this here. You know, what a way to elevate yourself. Mega Man literally flying up to space on the back of Rush Jet. I love it, you know, but we'll be covering more from Mega Man 5 next time in part 2. I'll see you then.